Hey, Mark, welcome to Age Better. It's so nice to have you here today with me.
So glad to be here. Thanks for having me.
And we have a lot to talk about. I was just floored, as I said in my intro to this episode, by your talk last week in DC, where I was attending the Bone Health and Osteoporosis Foundation board meeting and then a conference that brought together a lot of bone experts from around the country. And you gave the keynote speech, and it was really stunningly incredible. And we were all talking about it afterwards. So I'm really happy to have you here. I know this was short notice. So, just give the Age Better audience a bit of insight into your personal journey. Like, share your story. What happened to you that led
Sure.
you to where you are now?
Sure. And I will go back to the beginning, but I will promise everybody listening or watching that it won't take as long as it might sound. Because I was born with a congenital heart defect, so I was medevaced by helicopter hours after birth and had open heart surgery when I was 1 day old, and then a second surgery when I was a year old. And I'm a parent now of three healthy kids, thankfully, but it wasn't until I became a parent, I think, that I really appreciated what that meant for my two parents, who at the time were 24 years old. They'd been married for less than a year, and then to deal with what I put them through in the first 2 years of their relationship in my life was pretty crazy. And at the end of the second surgery, doctors sort of told them, uh, be prepared for several more surgeries, probably before he starts school. And he has a long road ahead and nothing is certain, but for now, take him home. He's stable. Try and raise him as normally as you can. And I was very fortunate that, barring some, relatively minor hiccups along the way, I did quite well for almost 20 years.
Mm-hmm.
And then I developed something called pulmonary hypertension. So, for those not familiar, essentially the uh, arterial pressure in the pulmonary artery that carries blood to and from, oxygenated blood from the heart, became very high. And so we knew for a long time that I would need a new heart at some point. And then once I developed this condition, they said, no, you're going to need a heart and lungs when the time comes. And it was in October of 2001, um, when I just could no longer really function. I couldn't get, climb a flight of stairs and be out of breath. Fatigued very easily, was losing weight pretty rapidly, and was hospitalized for a month, and then stabilized enough to then recommend me for transplant. I was evaluated by the team in Toronto, and fortunately, they were willing to take a risk on a high risk patient and put me on their list. And we waited on the transplant list for almost a year. I moved out of province, for me in Canada, so be out of state, in your situation,
Mm-hmm.
about halfway across the country. Waited for 6 months outside of the hospital, or 4 months outside of the hospital, another 6 months inside the hospital as an inpatient. And then on September the 7th, 2002, at 10:15 p.m., I received the call that I would be getting a transplant, and 24 hours later was stable in the ICU, and 14 days later was discharged from the hospital.
I just want to interrupt that story for a second. Could you just repeat what you told us at the conference last week when you gave your keynote, telling your story about what you said to your mom as you were being wheeled into the operating room?
Yeah, so my mom and dad uh, were lived apart for a year so that one of them could so that my three brothers could stay at home, first of all, because they were all school aged, to try and normalize their life as much as possible. And so one of
Hmm.
them stayed there and one of them was with me. And it was my mom that was with me when we got the call. And she came in and we spent some time together, obviously waiting for the surgeons. But when they finally came, uh, we looked at each other and I said, Mom, I'm going to see you soon. And those were
Yeah,
the last words I said.
yeah, yeah. As a mother of two daughters, one of whom, by the way, my first daughter, who is now will be 30 in a couple of weeks. She was born 3 months early, so she didn't have nearly the drama that you did. But she was born 3 months early and she weighed 2 pounds. And so
Yeah.
it was like a shock. And so I
Yeah.
completely relate. And I know, being a mother, that those words that you gave to your mother was a gift.
Mm.
She held on to that. There's no doubt in my mind, and that had to have helped her and your father get
Mm.
through the ensuing hours as you were being, in surgery. It's just an incredible story, and we are so happy that you are healthy, and we'll get to just how healthy you are and the things that you've achieved physically in a few minutes. But you give talks around the country, around the world actually, and motivational talks, and you coach people on resilience. But you've also written this really terrific book, which we all got a copy of at the event last week, The Resilience Roadmap. And in it, you talk through 7 guideposts to help people to really build their resilience and to address challenges as they come up along the way, because really life is just a series of changes and challenges that we all have to confront. So can you just walk us briefly through those 7 guideposts, please?
Absolutely. So very quickly, they're 7 A's. That's as much for my benefit to remember what I'm giving a presentation as anything else. But it's acknowledge the problem, right? Accept, adapt, aspire, act, and assess. So first we acknowledge that the problem is there, and that's not a given. As we all know, we all, I think, are susceptible to denial when facing certain issues and challenges for shorter and longer periods of time, depending on who we are and what the challenge might be. Uh, and so unless and until we do that, then we can't be resilient because we can't face the problem, right? So
Right.
acknowledge the problem is there. Then acceptance is about saying, okay, well, in any given situation, there are aspects of this situation that are within my control and aspects that are not. And human nature is that we try and control as much as we possibly can, to the point that we will try and control things that we can't. And that typically results in anxiety and worry and a whole host of other negative things that ultimately just waste our time and our energy. So helping people to, and consciously for ourselves, working on letting go of those things is probably the hardest part of this process, but also the most important. The better we can do, the better job we do at that, the more resilient we become, because then we preserve that valuable time and energy that we need to take the action that we can take, which is where adaptation comes in. So how do we change our behavior, our thinking, to cope with or adapt to the challenge that we're currently facing?
Hmm.
The aspiration part is about saying, okay, well, where do I want to go now? Right? Things have changed. Maybe my goals have changed. Maybe they haven't. But what is my clear and compelling vision? I call it in the book. What's the drive that's going to get me to do the hard things I need to do, because it's going to be hard sometimes,
Hmm.
to get where I want to go. And once we have that, then we can say, okay, what are the action steps that I need to take? And then the assessment piece is about saying, okay, is my plan working? I think every 90 days, let's take a look and say, okay, we created this plan based on what we knew then. Is it working? If it is, great, let's keep going. If it's not, give ourselves permission to say, that's okay, let's reevaluate. Let's take the pieces that are still working and let's change the pieces that aren't, and chart a new course forward. So that's the roadmap in a bite
Kind of
size.
in a nutshell, exactly right.
Yeah.
No, I appreciate that. That's great. And really, everyone, I'm holding up the book again, The Resilience Roadmap. All of that goes into much greater detail on how you can really apply these principles to your own life. Because, in my mind, as I said before, life is a series of change and challenges. And this is especially true, I think, and I have found personally, as one gets older. One of my favorite A's, to call it your group of A's, it might be my favorite A, is assessment. I am always talking about and urging people to reassess. You say every 90 days, That's probably the best idea. I say every couple of years, but I think we need to
Mm,
assess even more. And I
mm,
usually use the word assessment more on a physical basis, like
mhm.
as you get older and what can you accomplish? Like say you've been if you're running a marathon, which we'll get to, running a marathon at a certain pace, and maybe you have to kind of reassess where you are as you get older and if you've had any illnesses come your way and so on. So reassessment or assessment is so critically
Mm.
important, right? Because it helps you to adapt then and then take action and all the other A's that you talked about.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I think it's probably if for the person listening to this, you're probably already a pretty motivated, driven kind of person because that's the kind of person that listens to a podcast in the first place. Uh, and our tendency, I think, speaking as somebody who puts himself in that category, is that we can get so driven and forward focused sometimes that we forget to pause and say, okay, but am I is my ladder leaning against the right wall, to use that metaphor, right? Sometimes we climb the ladder, we climb the ladder, we climb the ladder, and realize, oh, wait a minute, this goal that I'm chasing isn't the right goal anymore
Yeah.
for any number of reasons, right? So the assessment is really just to say, is this still what I want? Is the plan still gonna get me there? And if either of those things is no, then it's okay to change your mind and do something different. Um, my line of work as a motivational speaker, people love to say, you know, don't stop, don't quit, never give up, and never give up trying. Absolutely, but to say never stop doing a particular thing is silly. I mean, if it's not working, banging your head against the wall some more so that you can feel like you're determined. It's not particularly constructive.
Yeah, that's a wonderful thing you just said. That's very, very powerful. It's like you're giving permission to everyone to give yourselves permission to let go of something that's no longer working for you. That is just like, you've been barking up the wrong tree. Let's throw in a lot of those.
Right.
Right? Okay, now let's segue over to marathons. One of my favorite topics. I happen to be a marathoner. I started running at 50. When I decided, hey, I'm 50, what do I do now? Let me start to
Yeah,
take some act, let
love
me
it.
assess, take some action, adapt, and everything else that you're
Love
talking
that.
about. So, okay, I mean, for me, I was just getting older. For you, you had gone through an incredible or physical and mental, as you discussed at great length in your
Mm.
talk and in your book, ordeal. So what did you do to prepare to run your first marathon, which you have done, and in fact you've run several? What did you do?
So as I explained in the presentation, literally started from as close to zero as you can get. I think as an adult. I mean, I was vastly underweight. I hadn't walked on my own in 5 days when I first decided that this was something I might like to do. So I was really starting with no base, no even very little muscle mass, let alone any kind of training. But I had a mandatory rehab program that the multi-organ transplant program required you to do for 90 days after the transplant. So I did that.
Wonderful.
Yeah,
Wonderful. Yes.
very, very smart. Not only just to get you breathing more, and which obviously helps with the rehab of the lungs and the heart for that matter, but also just to regain strength and mobility and all kinds of things that when you've been, as many people are, bedridden for a period of time, becomes a big issue. And then uh, I mean, it was uncomfortable, but at the same time, it felt so good to be mobile, to not be restricted by my cardiovascular system. I mean, I was post transplant, especially in those first few months, far more restricted by my strength than I was by my cardiovascular system, which was new for me. And
Yes.
that was really kind of neat. And then I just I just said, well, I'm going to keep going and see how far I can push this. And I set the goal very, very early, but probably within a year I thought, no, this is definitely possible if I just keep putting in the mile. As you know, when you train for a marathon, it's really just about the discipline of putting in the miles consistently over time so that your body can adapt and get used to that.
Yep.
And yeah, it took 2.5 years to to get ready to do the first one. About a year and a bit to do the first half marathon. I actually ran my first half marathon on my 27th birthday, which was birthday I didn't think I would get to see. So that was maybe even more special than running the first marathon. But
Yes,
yeah,
understandably. Mm-hmm.
yeah.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. What was your first marathon? Like, where was it?
First marathon was a Blue Nose International Marathon. It's run in Halifax, Nova Scotia, um, in May of 2005. And as it turns out, it was a tropical storm slash hurricane that day. Uh,
Oh my gosh.
and if it hadn't been my first marathon, I may not have run it at all. But again, when you've had all this build up for so long and you've been looking forward to this for so long, it felt like, well, I just have to try and see if I can do it.
Yeah. Yeah.
Uh,
And you did it. You
and I did
did
it.
it.
Worst marathon time I've had, worst experience I've had running a marathon. Um, but I think as I shared, also the one that I'm probably the most proud of because of how hard it was in the first place.
Yes, yes, yeah, yeah. That was really quite a moving and dramatic overview of that marathon race. And I do know what you mean about that because everybody who's training for a marathon, and really any race for that matter, but really a marathon, you put so much into it. You put so much of your time and effort and energy, and time away from other things, including
Mm,
possibly your family time. Certainly to get those weekly long runs in. We know what that's like, Mark, right?
mm-hmm. Yep.
And then you have to wonder if the weather is really bad, assuming that they still continue to hold it, right?
Right.
No lightning or anything really
Right.
dangerous. But if the weather is really not ideal, will you continue to do it? And you kind of have to make that decision. And I think that's part of the resilience too. You decide, no, I'm going to do it. I'll do it. I'm going to do it.
Yeah.
Not
Yeah.
easy. Yeah. All right. So, have you ever run New York City Marathon?
I have not. That's a bucket list.
It
That's a
is,
bucket
right?
list one. Yeah.
You should definitely run that
Mm,
marathon. So for many people, the changes we talked a little bit about that, the changes and challenges that come with aging, like retirement and health issues and
mm,
loss. Loss. This is kind of the time when we start to lose friends and family to age and death, and it can
mm.
be overwhelming. And so, what advice do you have for someone who's really struggling with these changes?
It's a great question. I mean, again, and so first we talked about acceptance earlier. I think that's part of it is you know I have yet to encounter anything in my life that is entirely good or entirely bad. Right? So even the best of things, there's inconveniences and things that you're just, a wedding has a lot of headaches, for example, even though it's this wonderfully joyous occasion, or the birth of your child is wonderful, but it also comes with stress and all of these other things. And conversely, I think even, the worst of the worst things, we lose somebody. Well, if we're looking, we can find, well, it brought everybody together and we had a chance to really talk about somebody and appreciate their life, right? Whatever it is. So, I think choosing to give our time and attention to the positive aspects of situations that may be more challenging just kept us in a better frame of mind. I think that's number one. Um, as we talked about at the event, recognizing that different isn't dangerous or bad. It's just different. We are creatures of habit, and so we tend to not like change, and we tend to prefer things to stay the same.
Hmm.
But oftentimes things get better, not worse. They're, when they get different. So, having the open mindedness to say, well, this is going to be different, but that doesn't mean it's worse. It's just going to be different.
Different.
Yeah. Um, eh, and in terms of of losing people, I mean, I'm 47, but because of my experience, a lot of my friends are transplant friends, and the typical survival lifespan of someone with a transplant is not that of a normal person. And so I've lost many more friends than my healthy aged friends of my age will have. Um, and so I kind of relate, I think, to what probably some of your listeners are feeling. And there's that, it's a complex, it's a complex feeling, right? Because at least for me, there's the loss of losing that person. There's the survivor's guilt of why am I still here and they're not. Um, and I don't know that there are easy answers to that other than I try and focus on on gratitude, on the blessings that I have, and on the opportunity that I have that I had to meet and know that person. Somebody far wiser than me, somewhere in a podcast or a video or something, said that the pain and grieving that we experience when we lose somebody is um, is proportionate to our love for that person, right? And so if we think about, wow, this really hurts, well, that also means I had the opportunity to love that person for so long, and what a gift that was. And it doesn't take the pain away, but I think it gives it a different tone that maybe helps us to cope with it a little better.
Yes. Thank you for that, Mark. Resilience, the Resilience Roadmap, holding it up again. Really great book, everyone. It involves bouncing back. I mean, that's resilience, right? From setbacks. Can you share a specific instance when you kind of bounced back from a major setback? I mean, other than, of course, your surgeries.
Well, yeah, Barbara, if you, forgive me, but I'm gonna tweak that a little bit, because I think
Sure.
that is the common sort of explanation of resilience, and I actually like to think of it as growing through versus bouncing back, and here's why. I think when we talk about bouncing back, at least for me, that denotes this, or it brings to mind this idea that we're returning to what was. And the problem with that is that that's not possible, right? Because you don't step into the same river twice. Time continues. Today isn't the same as yesterday. It might feel the same, but in some ways it's different. So if our aspiration is to return to what used to be, we're probably going to be disappointed because we can't reconstruct the past. What we can do is take the adversity that we've experienced, use it, learn from it, grow from it, and hopefully be a different but maybe better version of ourselves after than we were before. And I think there are countless examples of people throughout history for whom that is true. The um, many of the people who we kind of hold up in society on a pedestal as heroes, it's not in spite of, but because of the things that they overcame, that we admire them in the first place. You talk about the Helen Kellers and the Martin Luther Kings of the world. Um, if they had had a normal, easy life, we probably wouldn't know who they are.
That's true.
So, eh, I think, yeah, it's not, don't, it's okay to give ourselves permission to be sad and angry and whatever we're going to feel about whatever it is we are going through. And yet to try and see what can I learn from this? How am I going to be better off, or better, a better human because of this? What
Yes.
skills might I acquire? What perspective might I gain? And when we're ready, how might I serve others with what I have learned? Because for me anyway, the quickest path to gain a sense of purpose and meaning again was to figure out, how can I use this in a way that's going to make somebody else's life better, so that it isn't just about my experience. It'll let that there's something very, very rewarding about that. I don't know if I answered the question or not, but that's yeah, I think that's
You
the
absolutely
big key.
did. And thank you for that. Thank you for kind of reframing resilience to in the way you just did, and also kind of connects perfectly back to what you were saying earlier about different. Different isn't always bad. Different just is. And different could be good. Different could be better. So it's really, it's very similar. We have to just kind of reframe how we use a lot of these words in terms of
Mm,
how we, getting motivated, motivating ourselves, motivating others. And I think that the way you just talked through resilience was really so clear to me, and I totally get it, and I thank you for that. Really great. But talking about resilience, it's sure, when we think of resilience, we think of like some big setback, and then we have to,
mm.
I'm not going to say bounce back anymore, we're going to kind of work through it and see what the
Mhm,
outcome is, which will be different. You're
mhm.
right, it has to be, just, it has to be different, and hopefully better. But it's also like everyday
It
resilience.
is. Yeah.
I don't want everyone to think about just like those big events, big life events,
Hmm.
which of course do happen, but like everyday resilience. What do you do, Mark? Like, what can you share with us? What do you do? What do you practice every day to just kind of maintain your sense of resilience?
Love that question. I think ultimately building the skill or the kind of the muscle, metaphorically speaking, of resilience to me is really just about doing hard things regularly. And by hard, I don't mean, yeah, overcoming tremendous adversity. It's giving ourselves little challenges. So, and that's going to be different for different people depending on where their strengths and weaknesses are and what their life situation is. So I think I gave the example at the event that I will do a cold shower in the morning.
Yes.
And I do that. Well, there's some physiological benefits to doing it, but I also do it because it's a not an easy way. That's the wrong word. It's a it's a without having to think about it. It's a quick way that I can challenge myself every day. I don't have to develop some elaborate scheme. I just know that I'm going to take the shower. I'm not going to like it. Uh, but I'm
But you're also getting some, as you pointed out, some physiological benefits from it. We know
absolutely
that
right.
it
So
helps
there's
kind of
it
fight
does, yeah,
inflammation, it builds your
that's right.
immune system. Hmm.
Yeah,
Yep.
absolutely. It gets some really good neurochemistry going in your
Wakes you
brain.
up.
Yeah, that's right. You don't need your coffee. I still enjoy it, but I don't need it. Um, but I, but the biggest win of that is the win over my own brain and my own desire for comfort,
Hmm.
right? And the reinforcement of the fact that, oh, I'm capable of doing that thing. And so for somebody listening right now, you've lived a large experience of life at this point, I'm going to guess. And so there are no doubt dozens of things that you have overcome in your life already. And one of the things that I think we discount, generally speaking, as people, is how strong we have become because of the things that we have been through. And we just tend to think, well, everybody does it because it's our lived experience and we don't know any different. But if you really look back and say, hey, I'm the person that did this and this and this and this and this, and actually, I'm not even that person, I'm a better version of that person because I had all those experiences and I've learned from them.
Yes.
Then when you're facing this next thing that feels intimidating, go, wait a minute. I'm the same person today, only with all of these extra tools with me now. So I'm very equipped to deal with whatever this new thing might be.
Yeah.
And that to me is what resilience is about. It's about just kind of adding more tools to the toolbox so that you're better equipped to handle whatever the next thing might be.
Right. And I think that another component, and I heard this in your talk and I saw it in your book, another kind of component of resilience is your social support, your friends and your family. I know, again, as a mother, I was so happy to hear what a big part your mother
Mhm.
played in your whole journey. The things that she said, the help that she gave you at that one pivotal point when you
Mm,
were in the hospital room, when you were just really feeling very defeated and understandably, Mark, very defeated. And, because at that point you had not yet gotten word that you had, the heart and the lungs in place to receive,
right.
and to have that surgery, that necessary surgery. So, but your mother helped you to reframe how you were looking at everything.
Hmm.
And that was just so important to you. And it was a pivotal moment in your life.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. And so for everybody, essentially what she said was, I think I said I was having a pity party, as I think we all do
Yes.
occasionally. Um, and she said, Mark, you have to make a choice. You can choose to feel sorry for yourself. It's understandable. I understand. It wasn't that she was unempathetic, but she said it's not working. All it's doing is making you more discouraged and more depressed every day. And so, what if instead you focused on what's going right instead of what's going wrong, what you had to be grateful for instead of what you lost, what you control instead of what you don't? And as I shared with you, it took me 3 or 4 weeks to accept the advice.
Hmm.
Um, but wow, is that powerful. The biggest lesson for me then is different than it is today. That today, I think the biggest lesson is the parenting lesson there, which is, I, for most of us, I think the temptation is to do our best to protect and or remove our children from challenges, right? We anticipate problems and we try and solve it for them or prevent them from happening. And and it wasn't that she was, throwing me off my bike to force me to deal with challenges,
Yeah, it wasn't tough
but
love.
it wasn't tough love, but it was also not candy coating reality,
Right.
right? It was saying this is life. Sometimes life is hard, but that's okay. You can do hard things,
Yeah.
right? And that to me is the message that our kids need to get, is in a safe, nurturing way, supportive way. Let's allow them to struggle. Let's allow them to face challenge. Let's allow them to fail, because that's how we all learn to do things. And by depriving kids of the opportunity to do that, we're depriving them of the lessons that come with it.
Yeah. Yeah. Thank you for that, Mark. And please send regards to your mom. I think she's a rock
I will.
star.
Well, I will. She is.
And so tell us, let's stick with resilience for a moment, because I think this is something that everybody wants more of, and developing it, practicing it, maintaining it, improving on it. These are all life goals that are critical, I think, to our overall success as human beings, and I think to our happiness too. So your definition of resilience, has it evolved over the years? Does it continue to evolve? Or do you think you have found really the meaning of resilience, as you've already explained to us? Tell us about that. How has it changed for you?
Yeah, I think it certainly has evolved, and so I do think I've landed on it, but I thought I landed on it 15 years ago, so I'll probably think differently. I'll probably
Isn't
think
that
differently, right?
right?
Yeah, as
Right.
I get older and have different experiences and different frames of reference.
It's
Uh,
an assessment. You're going to reassess
Absolutely.
even resilience and see how is it working for you. Well, like maybe you can add some other tools. Like, it's funny. You did mention what your mom said to you in the hospital that pivotal day, where why don't you look at the things that you should be grateful for, like that things that are good, and that's a form of resilience too. It's like that
Hmm.
gratitude. And I know many people who write like gratitude journals, and make a list at night as a practice of all the things that they were grateful for that day, and so on and so forth. And I really do think that all of that really does help to with your resilience practice, don't you think?
Absolutely. Yeah,
Yeah.
absolutely. We what we pay attention to grows, right? And so if you pay more attention to those things that you're grateful for, you tend to see more of them, and maybe even more of them happen, but certainly see more of them. And so all of a sudden it's like, oh, well, maybe life isn't quite as bad as I thought it was, because look at all this evidence that tells me life isn't, is actually pretty great.
Right. Right. Life is pretty great. It's pretty darn great. So, okay. So for everyone listening, and I know that they are as eager as I am to really kind of build on our resilience as we go forward in life, and this challenges might even get greater. Give us you're like your number one actionable step that you think
Okay.
everyone should start doing right now, today. What is it? That number one thing.
Do do something that challenges you tomorrow. And it doesn't need to be big. Um, it might be having a tough conversation with somebody that you need to talk to, that you haven't talked to. It might be trying to cook something you've never cooked. Like whatever it is,
Yeah.
it's just saying this is a little outside of my comfort zone. I'm not sure how this is gonna go, but I'm gonna make myself do it. I'm gonna make myself feel the discomfort, and I'm gonna be okay on the other side. And that's gonna reinforce that neuro circuit in our brain, that idea of, oh, I can do things that are challenging and uncomfortable, and I'm gonna be okay. And not only am I gonna be okay, but I'll probably learn something from it. I'll probably learn that it wasn't as hard as I thought it was, and that'll give me courage to go and try the next thing.
Yeah. And this whole thing about it probably wasn't as hard as I thought it was brings me back to the like a flash memory of your talk when you said, you're capable of doing much more than you realize. And the way that you were able to have us visualize that is we say, raise one arm and as high as you can go, and then raise the and keep it up, and then raise your other arm and go as high as you can. And of course, it was higher than the first arm, because we are capable of doing so much more than we know. And that was just had a huge impact on me, Mark. So
Oh,
I thank you. Well, I thank you for the
thank you.
whole talk. I thank you for your book and everything that you're doing to kind of share your experience, your journey, what you've learned, everything with the rest of the world. It's so, so important. And I really, not just me, but I know everyone, the hundreds of us who were in the audience listening to you, really got so much out of your talk, and I know that everyone listening today will also, for sure. But before we let you go, this was an incredible conversation. Before we let you go, and I always like to end my episodes this way. Can you just give us 3 key takeaways that you really want the Age Better audience to remember from our chat today?
Okay. Let me see. You can do hard things.
Yep.
You are stronger and more capable than you think.
Yeah.
Um, and when you take the time to look around, life is probably better than you give it credit for.
So thank you so much for joining me today. I
My
really
pleasure.
appreciate it.
Thanks for having me, Barbara.